This is probably one of the most bloody confusing things I've ever read in my life. It's like trying to read the instructions to a game of bridge, but the instructions are printed in hieroglyphics, and I'm blindfolded. Okay, so it's not that bad, but it took a few times to get that damned thing to sink into my tiny brain. Characters segue in and out of the play like a revolving door, and to make matters worse, some characters look identical to each other. Some characters even have the same flipping name. But I managed to finish it, and better yet, I managed to make a video about it. With that being said, sit back and relax as I try and guide you through what Shakespeare so aptly named a comedy. Act 1, Scene 1. We first start the play by entering the Ephesian marketplace, where the Duke of Ephesus, known as Solinus, is sentencing a poor merchant named Aegeon to death. The nature of his crime is quite political, for you see, Aegeon was a merchant from the land of Syracuse, and merchants from Syracuse had been banned from entering Ephesus. The same is true of merchants from Ephesus, who were forbidden from entering Syracuse. Now, the punishment for violating this law was indeed death. But like with most things in life, if you had the cash, you could buy your way out of your circumstances. The price to pay, however, was 1,000 marks, and Aegeon was pretty short in the finance department. To Aegeon's credit, he doesn't beg for his life, nor even seem that interested in living anymore anyway. Yet this my comfort, when your words are done, my woes end likewise with the evening sun, he says, which basically translates to, shut up and kill me already. The Duke Solinus, who was probably used to seeing merchants from Syracuse beg for their lives, became curious as to why Aegeon was so defeated, and why he seemed to welcome his death. He questions how he came to be in these circumstances, and why he had left Syracuse to come to Ephesus at all. A heavier task could not have been imposed than I to speak my griefs unspeakable, Aegeon tells the Duke. A declaration that he couldn't possibly speak of his grief because it would bring him too much pain. You know, right before he actually starts talking about it. We learn all about Aegeon's life. That he was born in Syracuse, that he lived with his wife, and that at one point in his life, he made lots of money as a merchant. However, one day, his agent died, and this caused him to have to take care of the business himself, forcing him to move to Epidamium. Aegeon's wife, who was pregnant with twins at the time, ended up joining him. When Aegeon's wife gave birth, she gave birth to 2 identical boys. At the same time, a poor woman in the very same inn had also given birth to twin boys of her own. But this woman didn't have the financial means to raise her newborn children, so Aegeon ended up buying them off her. In the space of a day, his family had quadrupled in size, with 2 biological sons who were identical, and 2 non-biological sons who were also identical. Still following? Good, because it only gets more confusing. It is not known what possessed Aegeon to buy the poor woman's newborn sons, but it would appear that it was not done out of the goodness of his heart, and instead so that he could mold them into being his real son's servants. He tells the Duke, that very hour, and in the selfsame inn, a meaner woman was delivered such a burden. Male twins, both alike. Those, for their parents, were exceeding poor. I brought and brought up to attend my sons. So as to avoid any more confusion going forward, I'll be referring to Aegeon's biological sons as the real sons, and the adopted sons as the servant sons. You'll thank me later. After the sons are born, Aegeon and his new family head home to Syracuse, but their timing couldn't be worse, as a storm rolls in and threatens to destroy their ship. To take caution against this, Aegeon's wife ties down one of the real sons and one of the servant sons to the ship's mast, to prevent them from being swept away. Aegeon did the same thing with the other real son and the other servant son. As the storm rages on, their ship crashes into a giant rock. The ship is split right down the middle, and the family is separated, torn apart from each other by the crashing waves. Aegeon is able to save one of his real sons and one of his servant sons, but believes his wife and his remaining children to have most likely perished. In actuality, Aegeon's wife and the 2 babies were actually rescued by a ship that took them to Corinth. Aegeon, meanwhile, and the babies he had saved were rescued by another ship and taken back to Syracuse. With this, Aegeon never saw his wife, his second real son, or second servant son ever again. Aegeon reveals that 18 years have passed since that very night, and that his real son, the one he had saved, was now eager to find his long-lost brother. His name was Antipholus, or Antipholus of Syracuse as he's known throughout the play, and along with his servant brother, Dromio of Syracuse, they set out to find their long-lost relatives. Aegeon tells the Duke, "My youngest boy, and yet my eldest care, at 18 years became inquisitive after his brother, and important to me that his attendant, so his case was like, reft of his brother, but retained his name, might bear him company in the quest of him." However, this was 5 summers ago, and in that time Aegeon hadn't heard a peep from either one of them. Fearing that something bad must have happened to them, Aegeon travelled far as Asia in an effort to find them, before eventually finding his way to Ephesus. Indeed, we're led to believe that Ephesus was the last place that Aegeon had not searched, and though he knew that by setting foot in Ephesus would mean death for him, being a merchant from Syracuse, he would have rather risked dying than have not looked at all. At this point, the Duke is not only invested in Aegeon's tale, prompting him to continue every time he stops, but he's also pretty sympathetic. Hapless Aegeon, whom the fates have marked to bear the extremity of dire mishap, he states, before telling Aegeon that if it was up to him, he'd let him search all of Ephesus for his sons and let him go free. But unfortunately, his position does not allow him to bend the rules for poor old Aegeon. He does, however, offer a single mercy by granting Aegeon 1 day to raise 1,000 marks for his bail, and advises him to beg, plead, or borrow from the Ephesian people if need be. Act 1, Scene 2. As soon as Aegeon and the Duke leave the Ephesian marketplace, Aegeon's missing sons, Antipholus and Dromio of Syracuse, both just happen to show up. They converse with an Ephesian merchant who warns them of the law about Syracusean men showing up in Ephesus, and advises them to pretend to be from Epidamium. That way, they can avoid being arrested and ultimately killed by the Duke and his authorities. Funnily enough, the Ephesian merchant actually speaks of Aegeon having been arrested and sentenced to death, but as he doesn't say his name, no one is any the wiser. Antipholus of Syracuse sends his servant's brother, Dromio of Syracuse, off with some money so that he can get them a room at the local inn known as Centaur. Antipholus of Syracuse says he intends to do some sightseeing in the meantime, but instead he ends up lamenting over his lost brother and his lost mother. "I to the world am like a drop of water that in the ocean seeks another drop, who, falling there to find his fellow forth, unseen, unquisitive, confounds himself. So I, to find a mother and a brother in quest of them, unhappy, lose myself." Ultimately, this is a man who cannot be content until he has completed his quest in reuniting his lost family, but in the process of doing so, he believes he is becoming unhappier and unhappier, for with every passing moment without his long-lost brother and mother, he loses more and more of himself. During his little sob story, a man who looks identical to Dromio of Syracuse strolls by. This man is actually the long-lost servant brother of Dromio of Syracuse, now all grown up and living in Ephesus the whole time. Now, to make matters even more confusing, would you believe it that the long-lost servant brother was also named Dromio? Stay with me here, guys. So this servant brother was known as Dromio of Ephesus, on the account that he lived in Ephesus. He looked and sounded exactly like Dromio of Syracuse, but unlike his brother, he appears to have no interest in tracking down his sibling. In fact, he seems to be getting on with his own life, serving Antipholus of Syracuse's long-lost brother, who, unfortunately, is also named Antipholus. Antipholus of Ephesus, who looks identical to Antipholus of Syracuse. This doesn't make any bloody sense, I hear you say, and I couldn't agree more. Allow me to try and break it down for you. This is Antipholus of Syracuse. He is longing to reunite with his long-lost brother and mother. This is his servant's brother, Dromio of Syracuse. The two embark on their journey which has led them to Ephesus. This is Antipholus of Ephesus, the long-lost brother of Antipholus of Syracuse, and a married man living in Ephesus. This is his servant brother, Dromio of Ephesus, also the long-lost brother of Dromio of Syracuse. The Antipholuses of Syracuse and Ephesus look identical on the account that they are twin brothers. The Dromios of Syracuse and Ephesus also look identical on the account that they are also twin brothers. What a comedy, huh? Ha ha ha! So Dromio of Ephesus has been sent by Antipholus of Ephesus' wife to tell him to come home as he is late for dinner. When Dromio of Ephesus sees Antipholus of Syracuse lamenting on the street, he immediately mistakes him for Antipholus of Ephesus, that being his master. He approaches him and begs him to return home because his wife is getting hangry and is going to be pretty pissed off if he's any later for dinner. In fact, Dromio of Ephesus says that she'll take her anger out on him instead and probably beat him up for returning alone. Now, Antipholus of Syracuse is listening to Dromio of Ephesus speak and has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. In fact, he mistakes Dromio of Ephesus for his Dromio of Syracuse, which angers him even more because he believes the servant is talking gibberish. Stop in your wind, sir. Tell me this, I pray. Where have you left the money I have gave you? He asks Dromio of Ephesus, again believing him to be Dromio of Syracuse, as to what he has done with the money he gave him to secure the room at the Centaur Inn. Naturally, Dromio of Ephesus has no idea what he's talking about. He tells Antipholus of Syracuse, believing him to be Antipholus of Ephesus, my charge was but to fetch you from the mart home to your house, the Phoenix, sir, to dinner. My mistress and her sister stays for you. This causes Antipholus of Syracuse to get really irate, especially now as he believes that Dromio of Syracuse has stolen the money for himself, and is now denying knowing of all its existence at all with all this nonsense. He slaps the innocent Dromio of Ephesus, believing him to be Dromio of Syracuse, and proceeds to try and beat him up. Dromio of Ephesus, so confused and alarmed at the behaviour of who he believes to be his master, ends up running away. Antipholus of Syracuse watches Dromio of Ephesus scarper away. Alone again, and scratching his head over what had just transpired, Antipholus of Syracuse chalks the exchange up to some sorcery, for he believes Ephesus to be a town full of the occult and the dastardly. However, he does fear that his money has been stolen by his servant brother, and decides to hurry to the Centaur. He states, they say this town is full of cozenage, as nimble jugglers that deceive the eye, dark-working sorcerers that change the mind, soul-killing witches that deform the body, disguised cheaters, prating mountebanks, and many such like liberties of sin. If it proves so, I will be gone the sooner. I'll to the Centaur to go seek this slave. I greatly fear my money is not safe. Act 2, Scene 1. The scene then switches to the wife of Antipholus of Ephesus, Adriana,